Welcome everyone. Jai Jinendra sabhi ko. Before starting this session, I will recite the Namokar mantra. Namo Arihantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayaryanam, Namo Uvjayanam, Namo Loesav Sahunam, Eso Panch Namo Karo, Sava Papa Panasano, Mangalam Chaye Savvesim, Parmam Havai Mangalam. Ancient Jainism is an initiative to spread awareness on Jain history, heritage, archaeology, and literature, and other related aspects. For this, we organize online sessions which are open to all, and they revolve around interesting topics that cover the fascinating aspects of the Jain world. We are very proud to inform that we had the honor of hosting eminent scholars like Dr. Hampa Nagaraja and Dr. MNP Tiwari, along with a number of other scholars and students who have done research on Jainism. To get regular updates, you can follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel under the same name, Ancient Jainism. Our topic for today is Inscriptions and the Other Half, female worshippers of Mathura's Jain inscriptions. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Mr. Kshitij Jain, who is a young and promising speaker who will speak on the topic, which I just mentioned. Prior to this, Mr. Kshitij has been a speaker at the Jain Talks, a weekly program organized by the Jain Foundation, where he discussed about the significance of Jainism in the intellectual and literary traditions of India. He was interviewed by AIR Akashvani Mount Abu on literary activities and achievements. He has also spoken on the Ancient Jainism Forum before. At present, he's a student at St. Stephen's College in the University of Delhi, and involved in the study of Sanskrit at bachelor's level. He has several research publications to his credit, including those centered around India's history and culture. He has also co-authored a paper titled Capability Approach to Development in Jain Doctrines, that was published in the International Journal of Financial Management and Economics. Mr. Kshitij also writes poems, and which have been published in several newspapers and in literary magazines. So we are very glad to have Kshitij on our forum today again. And I give the floor without much delay to Kshitij so that he can enlighten us on the topic which he has chosen to speak on today. Kshitij, you can share your screen and start the lecture.
First of all, a hearty Jai Jinendra to all the audience present here. Thank you so much for coming. It is a pleasure to be back at Ancient Jainism. I last gave a talk here in December, which was based on Jain manuscript culture. And this time the focus of our talk is on a different practice. It is about the epigraphical record, which we find from the ancient Jain sites of Mathura. As Swamiji has already mentioned, the title of this talk is Inscriptions and the Other Half, Women in Jain Mathura Inscriptions. While on the first side, this topic might seem very broad or very vague, our special focus will be on the gender identities used by the female worshippers while making donations and while making dedications as reflected in these votive records or inscriptions mentioning these donations. And while we will talk about the gender identities used by these female householders, we will first of all try to find their presence and their contribution to the socio-religious activities of the Jain fold of that time. And at the same time, we'll also try to assess the importance which they must have held at that period of time. At the same time, we will also look that contrary to the popular belief that women did not have much role to play in Jain society, Mathura shows us a completely different picture, where women are not only actively making donations, but are also playing crucial role in the proper working of not only the Grihastha fold, but are also contributing to the smooth functioning of the Muni Sangha. And they are also present as female ascetics, as arikas in the Muni Sangha, which will also be a point of analysis here. So before we begin, I think we also need to put this concept of gender identities of Jain women in the larger perspective of Jain society and what the Jain social structure actually is. So basically, the Jain social structure can be divided or is essentially divided into two parts or two folds. The upper fold being of the Munis or the Muni Sangha, and the lower fold or the other fold being of the Grahastas or the household. And the Jain society is meant to be or is supposed to be working through a coordination or through a proper harmony between these two folds, in which the Muni Sangha not only inspires but also directs the householders what to do and how to go ahead with religious and spiritual activities for not only spiritual advancement but also the advancement of Jain society. And the same is seen in across the epigraphical and textual data, in which the Jain laity is always seen with making active donations, making active contributions to the religious activities. And as they
Kshitij, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is the screen visible? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, the screen is visible.
Just let me know when to change the slide, so I will do so.
Surely. So, a certain fact about the Jain laity, which the available epigraphical records as well as the textual records confirm, is their large-scale participation in the religious activities which were happening at different point of time. The lay followers of Jainism, as we have discussed, formulated the other half of the faith system and played an essential role in the functioning and activities of the system. In the words of Padmanabh S. Jaini, a renowned Indologist and an authority on Jain studies, there was an emphasis on the complete integration of lay followers in the religious system of Jainism. And to support this argument, he points out at the large number of Shravakachas written throughout the literary history of Jainism, which were meant to propound the right conduct for the Shravakas, for the householders. And this was done with the motive to not only include the Shravakas in the spiritual fold, but also to integrate them and also to ensure their proper participation in the religious ideas of the concurrent Jain society. James Weber, while referring to the integration of lay followers in the religious activities, believes that the Jains were the first to maintain a dualistic organization in their fold. To quote the author himself, perhaps the first, certainly, among the older confessions of cultured intellectuals who were successful in carrying out the typical dualistic organization. The community of the monks as nucleus, the laity, adorers as a community under the religious rule of the monks. So, James Weber, The Religion of India. Can we please change the slide? Hello. If talking in the perspective of the Mathura Jain inscriptions, we also see this close proximity between the Muni Sangha and the laity, with the former exerting a considerable degree of influence over the latter through its moral and religious orders, which adds on to their importance for studying the early social history of not only Jainism, but also the history of its female worshippers. In perspective of gender identities, their reflection throughout history and how epigraphical records present them, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit rightly points out that gender identities have been a social construct rather than a natural state of affairs. The association of certain gender roles and identities with women was a social process, depending upon the socio-cultural as well as, in this case, religious phenomena present in a particular time period. In this light, the predominant presence of women in the Jain votive inscriptions of Mathura is certainly indicative of the social processes that the community must have undergone. And we must not forget that the time phase of the Mathura inscriptions certainly exceeds certainly exceeds 3 or 4 centuries. So in such a large time period, there must have been social changes, there must have been rise of new social phenomena, decline of old social trends, and all these changes, all these developments are visible in these inscriptions, which should be linked to our central theme of gender identities. Now, the question comes that what the women laity was actually doing. The women laity is seen making donations such as idols and setting up ayakpats in the available epigraphs. Even though one should not take this presence as some evidence of a large-scale economic freedom of women, the Mathura inscriptions certainly provide that women had freedom to engage and participate in spiritual, religious, and social activities without any rigid control of the male counterparts or the male population of the household. Can we please change the slide? And we while we talk about the gender identities of these female worshippers, we also come across the fact that the question of women identities in the Jain society or in the overall Jain fold goes ahead of the contours of female laity, and is also related to the presence of arikas or the female ascetics in the monastic order. While shedding light on the relation with the Sangh, female donors indirectly give details of the female section of the Muni Sangh and therefore indicated the large-scale presence of women in the religious order. So, the present study about the interactions of Jain women with the monastic order and their subsequent association with certain gender roles will study the relevant inscriptions by dividing them into two types. The first type of inscriptions are those in which the women use the identity of Shavika or pupil alone or use it prior to their familial roles, giving the role of pupilship a greater importance. And the second type of inscriptions in which the female laity uses familial identities and familial roles along with the identity of being a follower, which in some cases is also absent, which indicates that the precedence or larger importance was being given to familial roles in such inscriptions. There will also be a focus on the female ascetics belonging to the Muni Sangh, who are referred in these votive inscriptions in an indirect manner because they themselves were not making donations. Definitely, they are referred or mentioned by the female mention their request or their inspiration behind the donation that they were making. The overall presence of the other half in the religious activities of the Shravaka fold of Jain society will be looked after in this discussion. Can we please change the slide? So through the detailed analysis that shall be just unfolded here, we will reach the following points of observations. Firstly, that the women actually played an active and significant role in the Jain religious order, which is very contrary to the general belief. They were present in the monastic order from the very beginnings, and the mentions of arikas, that is nuns, in the inscriptions prove that. The laywomen were also having constant interactions with the monastic order, which were happening in the form of religious commands made by the Sangh to the female laity for grants or donations. And thirdly, in terms of gender identities, the female donors used the identity of a follower, Shravika, along with other familial identities in these inscriptions. But in most cases, as the study will outline, the identity of Shravika, apart from appearing independently, also appears ahead of familial attributes when both of them are used together. At the same time, the attribute of being a lay follower is unmentioned too in some cases, which indicates that there was a flux or there was a variety in the types of gender roles and gender identities which the Jain women were using at that time. And it also depended that on which stage of their lives were these women were, which also dictated whether they were more inclined towards the Muni Sangh or they were more inclined towards their own families. Next slide, please. To properly assess the importance of the epigraphical records of Mathura, we will need to have a little look at the history of Jainism in Mathura, which easily dates the time period of 3rd century BC. Mathura had been a stronghold of Jainism since an ancient point of time, and Asim Kumar Chatterjee, a renowned Jain historian, propounds on the basis of a verse from Paumcharyam that Jainism had to endure unfavorable circumstances in the post-Nand dynasty period. The same text names 7 Shwetambar monks who were largely responsible for the spread of Jainism in the vicinity of Mathura. The archaeological finds connected with Jainism have been largely found at the site of Kankali Tila, including the numerous inscriptions that were subsequently studied and catalogued. The most interesting and significant find, though, at the Kankali Tila was the stoop that was excavated by Fruha. Vincent Smith, in his book The Jain Stoop and Other Antiquities at Mathura, considers the practice of erecting stupas in Jainism as ancient as in Buddhism. And in his views, the Jain stoop at Mathura was at least as old as the ancient most of the Buddhist stoop. The excavations done at Kankali Tila in Mathura have proven to be of an immense value to the history and antiquity of Jainism, because first of all, we do not find epigraphical records or archaeological records dating to an older time period, which can indicate the presence of Jainism in that region. And secondly, these finds also allow us to gather a more historical view of Jainism, as it was in the period roughly ranging from 2nd century BCE to the early Common Era centuries. They also provide evidences for the antiquity of Jainism in Mathura, indicating that the importance which this city must have enjoyed over a large period of time. Even early medieval Jain texts such as Vivid Teethkalp of Jinprab and Yashas Tilak Champu of Somprabhasuri refer to Mathura as an important sacred center. The significance of Mathura Jain inscriptions is also reflected in the information which they provide to us. Apart from the existence of stup, we also get to know the practice of establishing ayak patas, sacred slabs, which were donated for religious merit. The votive records also describe the prevalence of idol worship in the Jain society throughout the Kushana and post-Kushana era. But what should not be really forgotten is that these inscriptions, next slide please, these inscriptions provided direct access to the lives and activities of the common people who formed the laity, who formed the order of the householders, and which was working for the advent of the Jain society, which was working for the advent of Jainism on the instructions and commands of the Muni Sangha. These records are not just theoretical descriptions, but actually real life manifestations of what the Jains were doing in their contemporary times. Therefore, the practices, perceptions, and identities of the common people are the phenomena which we need to analyze in order to derive interpretations for this research. So what I have actually done for a proper analysis is that I have taken a few inscriptions out of which I considered more important out of the available inscriptions relevant to our discussion, and I have used these inscriptions as case studies, and then we will try to sort of find relevant essays or relevant trends. So the first one which we are taking here is the donation of Dharm Ghosha, which is a two-line inscription on a broken Toran, which merely mentions a donation made by Dharm Ghosha, who identifies herself as the disciple of Jain, an Acharya present in the Muni Sangha. The available details seem to have no peculiarities apart from the fact that the donor gives her identity of discipleship primary importance and chooses what Anas was speaking is that the important point which we get from this inscription is that the identity used by Dharm Ghosha is primarily that of being a disciple, and she does not use any other familial attributes and considers that her identity of being a disciple of Jain is sufficient enough. But when I was trying to analyze this inscription, I found another intriguing thing, which is the name of the donor, Dharm Ghosha, which any one of us present here can tell is very peculiar and very odd for a common householder woman. If we talk about those times and if we place this name in the times it was being used. A basic survey of the Jain records containing lives and times details of followers inducted in the Sangh will suffice to show that such names were commonly given to the individuals who had reached the spiritual stage somewhat intermediary between the Grihast Dharma and the Muni Dharma, which is visible in the position of Shullak and Elak, along with their female counterparts in the Digambar tradition of the present day time period. And even though we do not have a concrete evidence to show that the institutions of Shullak and Elak were present in Mathura as early as 2nd century BCE or in 1st century BCE, Dharm Ghosha must definitely have been a part of the Sangha itself and not a common laity, which is directly indicated by her name. She was a pupil, but she must have been a part of the Muni Sangh itself rather than being a householder. But if we go by this assumption, there is another problem which comes to us, which is the fact that the members of the monastic order in Jainism are not allowed to keep any personal property or personal wealth. So if this is the case, how actually Dharm Ghosha was able to make this donation is the real question or is the real problem. So even though there is no concrete answer, there is no direct answer to this question, we can assume that Dharm Ghosha must have made this donation while she was renouncing her householder life and while she was entering the Muni Sangha. And as a part of renouncing her personal wealth, she would have made this donation to sort of signify or to sort of symbolize her renouncing of the material world. Can we have the next slide, please? The second inscription, according to me, is interesting because it provides us with an actual interaction between a devotee woman and a female member of the Sangha, Datta and Grihashri, in which the former, that is Datta, inspires the latter, that is Grihashri, for a donation. Adding to the scenario, Datta further even identifies herself as the pupil of Arika Jiva and gives us a clear example of the presence of the institution of Arika in that time period. And we going ahead with the analysis of this inscription, we find a case of dual identification in this record, one done by the laywoman and the other done by the member of the monastic order. The point to note is that both Datta and Grihashri derive their identities of discipleship from a female figure, that is Arika Jiva in this case. The presence of Jiva in the inscription actually makes us agree to the assumption that women were being promoted to the highest possible position in the Sangha, and there was also a formalization of gender identity based roles within the monastic order by the time of this record. And the women ascetics, the female ascetics who were present in the Muni Sangha were expected to take a certain position, to take a certain role, and they had fixed functioning and fixed roles which they had to play, which they had to fulfill. One can also argue that in the field of faith and religion, Jain women weren't entirely on either their patriarchal family heads or even on the acharyas for deriving their spiritual identities. This argument should not be taken in a very far-fetched sense, but should be based on such evidences, even though their numbers are seriously limited. The large-scale presence of Arikas and other female members in the monastic order is reiterated by this record, which also emphasizes that the female halves of both the Grihast and the Muni systems were having frequent interactions at Mathura, which is also signified by this inscription. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, the third case study which we will take is the gift of female pupils. This inscription is originally listed as by Buehler as 11th, and it provides us with another interesting case in which the female donors refer to themselves only as the pupils of their respective acharyas and not by giving their own names. The record mentions a collective religious gift made by the pupils of Singhamitra, Shashi and Pushyamitra respectively. Out of these three, the pupil of Singhamitra is given the adjective of Sadachari, which Buehler translates as a female convert. It is also mentioned that the three female pupils made the gift together with Grihachet and Grihadas, whose identities are in a serious ambiguity because of a complete lack of information. This inscription provides us a curious case in which the female donors not only use the identity of discipleship primarily, but even go on to abandon their personal names and retain only the role of being a pupil. While the sole usage of pupil identity is a major feature of the inscription, it also becomes important to note that this inscription denotes the presence of female converts in the monastic order, which means that this process of inclusion must have started at least a century ago, due to which Jainism had gained enough popularity among the people like Scythians and that they were being inducted in the form of ascetics. This argument that newly arriving social groups such as the Scythians were being inducted in the Muni Sangha and were being included in the Jain society is also corroborated by another inscription, which is a stone inscription of the time of a king named Maharaja Rajatiraj, which mentions three laywomen, Ujhatika, Okharika, and Okha. In particular, Okha has been given the adjective of lay sister, Savavika Bhagini, which could mean that she and Ujhatika had made a dedication together, while Okharika was in some ways related to Ujhatika. The names such as Ujhatika and Okha are clearly peculiar for the general Indian society, and they clearly indicate Scythian roots, which have been confirmed and accepted by several scholars of repute, such as Asim Kumar Chatterjee. such as Asim Kumar Chatterjee as well as VK Jain. The couple of inscriptions presented here very well allow us to interpret that newly entering social groups, still under the process of assimilation, already enjoyed a considerable position in the Jain society, so much so that women belonging to such groups were present in the ascetic order and were also making active donations. Next slide, please. Uh, the next slide, the next case study which we are going to take is an inscription which is one of its kind, in which a mother acts as the spiritual guide to her son. This is a donation made by a perfumer named Kumara Bhatti, but the actual prominence of the record lies in the identification of the perfumer as the son of a female pupil, Shishini, of a monk Baldat. The distinctive point about the inscription is that Kumar Mitra is referred as a direct pupil of Baldat without any ambiguity. Moreover, to make things even more interesting, adjectives such as Bodhita, that is awakened, could have been used for her only if she had been a member of the ascetic order, not a simple lay follower. Other titles like Arya can be safely assumed as Arya also indicate that Kumar Mitra was initiated in the Muni Sangha before her son had gifted a Vardhaman idol upon her request, and she was not a pupil, but she was in all certainties a female ascetic by herself. This would also imply that members of all sections and classes were allowed to obtain the vow of asceticism and enter the Jain monastic order, and that the Jain fold of that time and Jainism of that time enjoyed a cross-societal and a cross-sectional support, at least in the vicinity of Mathura. Next slide, please. Buehler has suggested that Kumar Mitra must have become a nun after the death of her husband, and the advice of gifting an image to her son means that she was acting as his guide in religious and spiritual matters. He also finds the inscription remarkable because it is the only example of a nun acting as an advisor of a layman, and that is why in the beginning I referred to this inscription as one of its kind. The general trend seen in epigraphs otherwise is that the nuns used to advise the female lay followers instead of their male counterparts. And as we have discussed earlier, the presence of a woman belonging from the family of perfumers really emphasizes on the presence of a cross-sectional veneration for Jainism in Mathura, where groups like those of perfumers which were conventionally lower in the hierarchical system, were not only included in the mainstream Jainism, but were also given chances of spiritual growth, of spiritual development, and were also initiated in the Munisang based upon their personal merits and the merit of their penance. Can you have the next slide? So with this, we have come to the end of our first type, or the first category of inscriptions, which dealt with women who identified themselves with the role of a pupil primarily. The second type of inscriptions, which I mentioned earlier, relates to those records in which women donors have given more importance to their gender roles related to families, related to their identities as daughters, wives, and mothers. In this, we find one very interesting aspect about the inscriptions, which is the association of identities with two families by the women donors. The first one being their own paternal family, and the second one being the family of their husbands. Within such cases, there are records in which women appear both as daughters and wives, which we shall look through 3 instances. So in such inscriptions, we find that women are not only using the identities related to their maternal families, but are also using the identities connected with the families of their husbands. The first example of such types of inscription is that of Grihashri, who identifies herself as the daughter of Buddhi and the wife of Devil, who made a gift on the request of Arya Godash. Second such example is the donation of a 4-fold image of Arath made by Jita Mitra on the request of Arya Nandik. She appears as the daughter of Ritunandi, wife of Buddhi, and a mother. Her son's name is not decipherable, but it is known that he was a perfumer by profession. Next slide, please. The donation of Shyamadhya serves as the third example, in which she makes the donation of an image on the command of Dattilacharya and identifies herself as the daughter of Bhakti Bhav and the wife of ferryman Griha Mitrapalit. In all these 3 cases, two things which appear very clearly are that firstly, the donors haven't shown any association with the disciple role in these records, meaning that they did not relate with identities of discipleship and discipleship. And second, that they mentioned their daughterly identities before their wifely identities, and which can also mean that they were regularly connected with their paternal families. Why this was being done, why this fusion of identities which we just have seen was being done, is a complex question and can be answered only through speculations. One speculation is that they were making these donations either in the temples visited by their paternal families, or had made these donations along with them, that is for their merit, what we call punya in our common language. One can also argue that the Munisang played a role in keeping the familial relations connected and gave the women opportunities to maintain their association with their paternal relations. And while this does not seem too obvious through the other epigraphical records which are present at Jain sites of Mathura, we can easily see that the Munisang had a very influential role to play in the lives of the pupil, of the lay followers. And so it might have been the case that it also sort of acted as a linkage between the two families which were tied by marital relations. The second subcategory of inscriptions relates with comprehensive female identities. There are certain inscriptions found under the available corpus in which the women use comprehensive familial roles, mentioning their parents, their in-laws, husbands, and even children. The usage of numerous identities in the same record can be speculated to large-scale religious activities or donations jointly made by both the families of the women donors. The first such case is the setting up of an image of Vardhaman by Jaya, who names her father Navhastin and appears the daughter-in-law of Ghasin. She also mentions her three sons, Shivasen, Devasen, and Shivadev. She would also have mentioned her husband in all probabilities, but that part is missing now, which can be again attributed to damage in the inscription. She also gives a very detailed record of the Munisang and says that she set up the image for the acceptance of Arya Sandhi, whose two teachers are mentioned. Those teachers themselves are pupils of Arya Baltat. Dr. Buehler pays special attention to the word acceptance and compares it with the word parigrahe of Buddhist inscriptions. In his views, the ascetics had exhorted Jaya to make the donation, and the spiritual merit, that is punya, had been handed over to them. And if we go by the interpretation of Buehler, it becomes pertinent to ponder upon that why the ascetics demanded any such transfer of punya to them. What purpose did the setting up of the image actually serve in this case? In my personal opinion, this must have been a part of a large religious ritual performed by Jaya and her family, under which the image of Vardhaman would have been established to acknowledge the blessings of the Munisang. And one can also assume that this is an early sign of Jain religious activities turning into social functions with active participation of Munisang. And one can also argue that elements of social prestige, elements of social acceptance were also being associated with essentially religious and social activities, and that is something which is not very unfamiliar to all of us. And elements of social prestige, social acceptance are still attached with activities which primarily are religious in nature. The second example is the gift of Vijayashri, who goes on to enlist her detailed familial identities, that of the daughter of Bubu, first wife of Rajavasu, mother of Devil, and the paternal grandmother of Vishnubhav. She also goes on to mention that she is obedient to a nun whose name is unclear in the inscription. Similar to the previous inscription, I am having a little cold, so the weather is not being kind to me. Similar to the previous inscription, the female teacher of that Arika, Arya Jindasi, as well as her teacher, we again do not have a clear name of that teacher, are also mentioned. And we can safely assert that this donation was made on the occasion of some large-scale socio-religious function, as Vijayashri herself says that she fasted for a month and therefore a donation would have been made to commemorate it. The extensive familial identities used by the donor indicates the trend of aged women of the household participating in religious and spiritual activities, as well as the involvement of the entire family or the extended family on such instances. Can we have the next slide, please? Excuse me for a second.
Hello, Kshitij?
Hello, yes, I am here only.
I lost you for a minute, yeah.
So sorry, so sorry. Oh, so the final epigraphical instance that will be taken under this under this subcategory is the donation of a fourfold image by Sthira upon the request of R. Shairak, whose monastic lineage is given a lengthy description in the record. Sthira identifies herself as the daughter of Varanhastin and Devi, daughter-in-law of Jayadev and Mosahini, as well as the first wife of Kuthakasut. The trend of identification as the first wife, which we see in this inscription as well as in the previous record, indicates that the deeply rooted patriarchal system that had grappled every social institution, and it continues to do the same even in the present day time period. In such cases as this, we find the women to be totally dependent upon their husbands for identification in a familial setup. As the main concern of this talk lies in the process of identification done by Jain women, using the role of being one of the many wives as a mark of identity shows that how even the self-identification done by women was influenced by patriarchal values and beliefs. Can we go to the next slide? So the last inscription which we will analyze under this category is the donation made by a daughter. Is find a daughter making a donation without using any other familial identity. The donor, whose name is not decipherable, identifies herself as the daughter of the goldsmith Dev, and in all certainties, the donor is an unmarried woman who is associated only to her paternal family. This votive record, as well as those studied above, pose us with a different set of questions. And talking in the perspective of this particular record, we can ask that what about the Muni Sanghas, these women donors mentioned in their donations? For instance, would the daughter of Dev the goldsmith have continued her association with the Sangh to which her paternal family associated even after her marriage, or her devotion would have been transferred to the Muni Sangh venerated by the family of her husband? What about the married women placed in what we can call joint family systems, but still mention their parents while making a donation? So were they taking spiritual advices of the Muni Sangh venerated by the paternal family, or were they taking the spiritual direction of the Muni Sangh venerated by their immediate family or the families of their husbands? This is something which, again, we can only speculate, and there can't be any definitive answer to this question. Going one step further, we can also assume, and we can also find a possibility that both the families linked through marital relations associated themselves with the same Muni Sangh. The monastic order did play a very influential role in the life of common Jain laity, and there is a strong possibility that it would have acted as a common linkage among kinship of a community that has historically been interwoven in nature. And lest we forget, the Muni Sangh or the monastic order has always acted as the nucleus of the Jain community, while the Shavakas or the followers acted and led their activities around them. So in this case, it would not come as a surprise to us if we find the Muni Sanghas acting as some kind of linkage, some kind of a bridge between the two families which were otherwise linked through marital relations. So can we have the next slide, please? So with this, we come to an end of the second type of inscriptions, in which we find women using familial identities prior to the identities of being disciples and giving more importance to their roles as mothers, wives, daughters, etc. But there is one inscription which I think deserves a mention and which I think will contribute to our discussion on the identification of Jain women, as well as locating their presence in the spiritual and religious activities of their contemporary times. And this inscription is about the donation of a Devkul by Kotisan Basu. When we see the Buddhist canonical texts, we have several mentions of courtesans who joined as well as contributed to the Sangha. They even enjoyed the privilege of being disciples of the Buddha himself. The story of Ambapali being the most famous one is intended as at showing the all-inclusive and compassionate nature of the Buddhist path. Even though we do find similar stories in Jain literature, the presence of sections like those of courtesans in Jain laity is a less mentioned than less research prospect. And the Mathura inscriptions provide us with an important insight in this regard too, as we find a detailed votive record mentioning the dedication of a Devkul, the temple, and several other religious properties made by the Ganika Vasu. Ganika is a word used for the record becomes in fact interpreted that the religious activities she was undertaking was actually not an individual effort but was being done at a larger kinship level, and her immediate family was all part of the Jina. Please, can we move to the next slide? The dedication made by Vasu is many instances of courtesans making religious donations to attain both spiritual and social merit. The accumulation of wealth by these courtesans, which is often mentioned in classical literature, must have enabled them to provide generous amounts of money for social causes, for sectarian causes, which is also evident in the pompous votive record of Vasu, because she does not only dedicate the temple, but also a pond, also a hall, and several other properties. It can be also interpreted in the presence of her mother and other relatives. This was not an individual dedication, but kinship, immediate family, which should also be also involved in these activities. The donation of an temple by Vasu should be considered as an important detail provided by the record. We would be inclined to believe that Ganikas must have also been visiting temples if they were actually getting them constructed and dedicated. And like we can again come up with a question that was this being done because of the influential position usually possessed by the Ganikas, or was this being done because of their proximate connections with the aristocratic families? Such questions might lie outside the sphere of epigraphical data, better answered by tracing socio-cultural trends found in textual sources, which at a later time can be corroborated with textual sources. With this, we come to an end of the analytical part of the presentation, and to present a final analysis, or to present the to present a short gist of whatever we discussed. I think it won't be wrong to conclude that the inscriptions from Mathura disseminate or dismantle this myth or this stereotype that women did not have enough participation in the Jain fold historically. This stereotype is contradicted by the constant appearance of women donors, and moreover by the interactions they had with the Munisang or the monastic order. The role of women in the religious history of Jainism is also affirmed by the large-scale presence of female members in the monastic order. They have been called as Arya or Arika, and this institution has actually continued to live and thrive within the Jain monastic system. Even the identities used by them, as mentioned in the votive records by the householder women, provide for a curious case that needs to be analyzed in an independent research. The identities, the roles, the identities of Arikas, the roles played by them, and the place allocated to them within the Munisang is also something which we not find details about in a direct manner, but their indirect mention in epigraphical resources, epigraphical records might help us, and this merits another independent research. Explored in this research was analyzing the gender identities used by Jain women in those votive records in which we find their interaction with the Munisam in order to place the women identities within the broader scope of religious history and tradition of Jainism. These quote-unquote interactions which the female laity had were mostly in the form of some or the other request or order for donation, which were always met with due fulfillment. The two types of inscriptions which we saw, those in which the women used their identity of discipleship as a primary role, and those in which the identity of being a pupil was subsided by the familial roles and identities, are actually reflective of how complex the phenomena of identification can be. There is no denying the fact that the identities used by women in both kinds of inscription are largely derived from a patriarchal head of the institution, whether it is the household or it is the Munisang. The identity of a wife and or the identity of being an arika, both of these roles are ultimately directed and appropriated by the patriarchal head of the respective institution. But at the same time, there comes several intriguing instances which lie on the other side of the spectrum. The manner in which Tata, please, can we go to the next slide? The manner in which Tata, a householder, and Grihashri, a women ascetic, derived their identities of discipleship from Arya Jiva, who is a female institutional head, shows that the female figures of both segments of Jainism did also affiliate themselves with a female head in some cases, and hence based their identities in relation with. Excuse me for a second. So sorry for this interruption.
If anyone has any questions, they can please type in the chat box and I will take them later once we resume our session.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Kshitij.
And am I visible?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, please, Kshitij, you can start.
Sure. The ample number of records in which women have prioritized their discipleship role suggests that the freedom which they enjoyed in religious and spiritual matters, and freedom which they enjoyed while thinking of pursuing higher spiritual goals, was in no ways lesser to what freedom the male population enjoyed. And in this regard, we find a lesser control of the male counterparts of the household in terms of religious and spiritual advancements. There were also followers who did not attach themselves to discipleship, but continued their participation while being daughters, wives, and mothers primarily. One can rightly point out that this discussion raised more questions than actually answering many of these problems. But in these questions lies the actual purpose of studying our past through complex sources such as the Jain inscriptions of Mathura, and addressing issues like that of gender identities focused here. The presence of these questions and problems are reflective of the dynamic and ever-changing nature of the phenomena of identity that is as complex and intriguing as the very concept of history itself. And with this, I put my presentation to a rest. We come to an end of this talk. Thank you so much for being such patient audience. Thank you so much for giving me this chance to come here to speak and share about this topic. I hope that it not only gave us a new set of information, but also made us think and try to analyze a different aspect of ancient Jain social history. And I think that is enough on my part. The floor is, I think, now open to any questions which we might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kshitij. It was really insightful, and one aspect which is less spoken about not just Jainism, but religion in general, where women are subsided and their contribution is not highlighted. So this is something which we got to know, and also understand that women had monetary decisions they could make, you know, even if they are making it under their familial names. They had the franchisee, or they had the agency to decide whether how they want to use the money which they had. So this was very insightful. I have few questions. First is, are there any example of Jain nuns donating any object of worship at Mathura or anywhere else in the subcontinent, just like after the case of Dharmagosha? The examples of such donations are available in Buddhist texts and Buddhist history. So is there any similar instance in Mathura or in any other part of the subcontinent?
A very interesting question, and I find this question valid because if Dharma Ghosha, being a newly inducted person in the Sangh, was making a donation, there are possibilities. But till now, as the epigraphical records which I have looked into, I have not found of a female ascetic making a donation. But there is a case of Muni, an Arya, making donation of a sacred pillar for the purpose of worship. And in a different research I did a few months back, which was on the trends of worship in Jain society of Mathura, which is depicted in the Jain inscriptions of Mathura, I sort of tried to find answer to this question, that why actually did they make donation of the pillar, and were they allowed to keep personal properties is the real question here. And while there are instances in the Buddhist order in which nuns and monks were making donations, but I think even if we do find such cases in Jainism, their numbers, first of all, are certainly very less. And I do not believe that these donations are actual real donations. These are not donations directly made by the monk, that particular monk or nun himself or herself, because as we know, they were not allowed to keep personal property. So making a donation, I think, goes out of question.
Okay. Other than Arika, what are the other titles used by nuns in Jain inscriptions of Mathura?
A common title which we find is of Shishini, which is used by Jitamitra. And apart from this, Shavika Bhagini, as well as simply Arya, which is the Prakrit form of Arya, is the most commonly used for female members of the aesthetic order. And I believe Arya is sort of a synonym used for Arika only, even though it depends on in which context it is being used.
One more question that we have is, what is the probable ratio of inscriptions mentioning women? And if we compare these ratio with men on the Mathura Jain side, so how can we interpret what is the balance? Are there more women in number who are donating, or are there more men in number who are donating?
You will be surprised to know, and that this is one of the reasons I studied the Mathura inscriptions from a gender point of view, is that this ratio you talked about in very clear terms, if I may say, it is as high as 8:2. If there are 10 inscriptions, in 8 inscriptions we find the women making a donation, and in other two there might be cases in which the males are making donation, and in some scenarios this might even go to 9. Because in many inscriptions we find women making indirect donations as wives, donations as daughters, and but overall we find an overwhelming number of donations are directly or indirectly being made by the women. And I think at the same time, I do not think all of them need to be taken in the same lens, because even if we look today in the present day time scenario, in a common Indian household family, at least in North India, what I have observed is that donations are usually made in the name of the female members, whether it is the mother or it is the wife or it is the daughter-in-law. So I think a similar trend can be seen in the contemporary Jain society of Mathura. But yes, if we talk about ratio, we talk about number, an overwhelming number of inscriptions are actually ones in which women appear as donors, straight away donors.
There is one question in the chat box, and I would add to it from myself also. Are there enough studies about these ancient culture in our present day history? And is Jainism, like what I'm adding is the concept of the Jain studies, do they mention or do they have research regarding the role of gender or role of women in the religion? Are there other studies which we can refer to, or it is still a topic which needs more deliberation by people?
So I think there are three parts to this question. The first part, that is there enough study on ancient cultures and on ancient societies? This is a very broad question which lies outside the praxis of the current talk. And yes, there have been continuous archaeological excavations, continuous archaeological finds which give us more information, which give us more data and insights about ancient societies. Recent excavations at Sinoli, excavations at other parts in other parts of India should be referred to for finding more about ancient Indian societies. In the perspective of Jainism, yes, there have been extensive excavations at Mathura, at certain sites of other sites of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, as well as in Karnataka, as far as my study goes. The second question which you posed was are there other studies related to gender in the contemporary Gen studies, in the arena of Gen studies? So gender is a question uh, which is often analyzed by contemporary Indologists and contemporary historians to find out what exactly ancient societies had for women. And one very interesting book which I came in this regard was Padmanabh S. Jain's Gender and Salvation, in which the author basically talks about the ideas of salvation of women, Stri Moksha, in the Digambar and the Shvetamba tradition. And he talks about a continuous debate in which the Digambar tradition essentially denies women of liberation, whereas Shvetambar position takes a very rigid stance that women also are equally capable of attaining salvation. So yes, there are a few studies done, and at the same time, I feel that there is a need of not only analyzing gender, but other topics from a modern day historical perspective, from a modern day academic perspective, because if we find the academic attention given to the history of Jainism, it is still unsatisfactory. It is still very meager if we compare it with other Indian faith systems. And definitely there needs to be a more work on Jain social history, history of Jainism, its development through ages. And we do find a few scholars like J.E. Coate, Sarah Taylor, who have done significant works in this regard. Even Padmanabh S. Jain is one such name. Paul Dundas is another name. But yes, analyzing Jainism, analyzing various concepts such as of gender, of social change, of society in ancient Jainism, in Jain society, over a period of time, using primary texts and archaeological findings as secondary sources, as corroboratory sources, is something which is the need of the hour, according to me.
Thank you, Kshitij. That was really enlightening. And I firmly believe that if we dig more and if we study more, we will find active role of women in Jain history and in history and social structure in general. Because as a student of gender studies, I feel that things are not seen or explored from the perspective of women. So I think what you told us today reconfirms that women had been an active part of both religion and social order in this country and in the subcontinent. I thank you again for giving us a detailed insight in this. And I also thank all our participants who joined us today on this webinar. And if you have any other questions, you can mail us on our email ID. And if you have this recording will be available on YouTube in few days, which can be shared to other members if you want to learn more about.
मैडम एक क्वेश्चन था.
ओके,
पूछ सकते?
हाँ.
क्वेश्चन ये था जैसे कि जो भी इंस्क्रिप्शन मिले हैं, तो ये कौन सी लिपि भाषा मिले हैं? मतलब क्षितिज जी से पूछना था।
जो मथुरा से हमको अधिकतर इंस्क्रिप्शंस मिलते हैं, अधिकतर इंस्क्रिप्शंस की भाषा प्राकृत है और इनकी लिपि संस्कृत है, लिपि ब्राह्मी है, सॉरी। कुछ इंस्क्रिप्शंस ऐसे भी हैं जिसमें प्राकृत और संस्कृत का सम्मिश्रण हमको दिखता है। कुछ में हमको प्राकृत से इन्फ्लुएंस संस्कृत दिखती है और कुछ इंस्क्रिप्शंस ऐसी भी हैं जिनमें हमको संस्कृत से इन्फ्लुएंस प्राकृत दिखती है। ये मेरे ख्याल से निर्भर करता है कि हम किस समय की के अभिलेख की बात कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि मैंने शुरू में ही कहा था कि जो मथुरा के अवेलेबल इंस्क्रिप्शन है वो कम से कम 400 सालों का उनका टाइम फ्रेम है। तो इसके दौरान क्योंकि हमको जो सबसे पहले की इंस्क्रिप्शन इंडिया की मिलती है वो प्राकृत या पाली में लिखी हुई है, संस्कृत की इंस्क्रिप्शन थोड़े बाद में आती है, और फिर ऐसा भी टाइम आता है जब आपको संस्कृत से प्रभावित प्राकृत या प्राकृत से प्रभावित संस्कृत इंस्क्रिप्शन दिखती है। तो अगर आप 2nd सेंचुरी बीसी की इंस्क्रिप्शन कोई देखेंगे या 4th सेंचुरी बीसी की देखेंगे तो अधिक चांसेस इस चीज के होंगे कि वो इंस्क्रिप्शन प्राकृत में लिखी हो। और जैसे जैसे हमारा टाइम फ्रेम अर्ली कॉमन ईरा में आएगा, 1st सेंचुरी सीई में आएगा, तो वो भाषा धीमे धीमे संस्कृत में हमको बदलती हुई दिखेगी, जिसमें कई बार प्राकृत का सम्मिश्रण दिखता है। लिपि इसकी ब्राह्मी है, जिसमें कई बार हमको कुषाण ब्राह्मी के भी, मतलब हमको कुषाण ब्राह्मी भी दिखती है जो उसका एक रीजनल वेरिएशन था। लेकिन हाँ, लिपि के फ्रंट पर हमको ब्राह्मी लिपि मिलती है उस समय। लेकिन जैसे मैंने पहले भी कहा, ओवर द ऑफ टाइम वी आल्सो फाइंड सर्टेन डेवलपमेंट्स एंड चेंजेस इन द यूसेज ऑफ ब्राह्मी लिपि टू।
थैंक यू सर।
Thank you for this good question.
लास्ट एक और सवाल था, जस्ट एक क्रिएट हुआ। क्षितिज जी, अनुमति है, पूछ सकता हूँ ना?
हाँ जी, हाँ जी।
जैसे मेरा क्वेश्चन ये था, जैसे कि मैंने जैसे हम लोग कहते हैं ना कि आचार्य चाणक्य, चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य, बिंदु।
Okay. Thank you, Kshitij.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the insightful questions. And I close this session. And thank you, Kshitij, again for this
Thank you so much.
wonderful discussion that we had. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much.
थैंक यू सो मच। थैंक यू।